This week, the agenda surveyed the Scottish secession movement, explored the plight of part-time academics in Ontario's post-secondary institutions, and measured shifting power in the Middle East. The agenda's week in review begins with the future of Ontario's PC party. You've been laying low for the whole election campaign, right?
Well, it's a very interesting period for me because you said you heard my name a lot. I was reading it every day, sometimes inaccurately, I think. But no, I decided to say absolutely nothing, and I kept my part.
Well, we're glad you're breaking your silence tonight because it was interesting that both the Liberals and the Conservatives, in some respects, presented themselves to the electorate as the team better able to implement what you recommended. What did you make of all that?
You know, I don't think there was, in terms of the report and the financial dimension, I don't think there was any difference really between the three because they all embraced the notion of balancing the budget by 2017 and 18. And
you Tories a year faster.
Yeah, I feel you're faster, but the NDP 2017-18 and didn't announce any austerity measures, no cuts. But how are you going to do that? So all they did is, we'll create a separate minister responsible for the savings. Guess where they're going to find the savings? I mean, there's a finite number as a way of doing it. It may not be exactly what I had in the report, but I bet over time they too would have ended up doing some things that are pretty similar to what I recommended.
Just to remind everyone, is it 2.5 years ago already you brought that report out?
It was February 2012.
Yeah, 2.5 years ago. You brought this report out offering a roadmap to get to a balanced budget. You were told by the Liberals you can't recommend tax increases, but you also can't study a few other things. Show us how to get there. How much of the report, because I presume you've checked back in with it, how much has the government actually implemented?
Well, my point of reference came in February of 2013, so exactly a year after it was implemented. And they invited me in, they showed me a spreadsheet, and it had all the 362 recommendations, categorically rejected, categorically accepted, what had been done, and why it hadn't been done. And they added it up at the bottom and said 60% had been implemented. And I was skeptical, and I looked at it really closely, and I agreed. In fact, there was a few areas that I thought they could have given themselves credit. Now, that 60% in the election campaign has become 80%. I haven't seen the update from the 60 to 80. Not all the recommendations are of equal weight, though, and some of the bigger, weightier ones are in the 20% that haven't been done.
Well, that's what I wanted to figure out. Does the 80% refer to the number of recommendations or the dollar value of those recommendations?
Well, I'll deal with this two separately. It's 80% of the 362 recommendations. But the dollar value, if you look at the parameters to get to the balanced budget that were in the last budget, they're bang on what the Commission recommended. But do the policies line up to support that? That we don't know yet because, you know, you're Minister X and they say, well, you're going to get a 0.5% increase in the next 5 years. That's what's shown in the budget. But do you, as Minister X, have a plan to deliver 0.5%? Maybe not.
We'll see. One of the things that your silence that I found particularly frustrating was that I would have loved to have had Don Drummond at this set during the election campaign as a kind of a truth commissioner for all of the plans that were out there. And I want to do some of that right now because the Liberals, of course, introduced a budget which ultimately did not pass that, among other things, called for some pretty serious tax increases on very high-income people, $29 billion infrastructure plan, indexing the minimum wage, wage increases for personal support workers, no corporate tax increases, no 100,000 layoffs, unlike what the Tories have on offer, but some pretty serious spending cuts coming down the road. And I guess my question is, what's your overall assessment of that budget?
Well, certainly it dug the hole somewhat deeper, not infinitely deeper. Some of the things like the infrastructure, now you can cost that out over the life of the infrastructure, so it no longer hits you right up front. Didn't cut the corporate income tax, but that wasn't in the plan before, so that didn't cost them any addition. But they did keep with the endpoint. It's just that it's going to be harder now to, after having spent more money in the first 2 years, to subsequently rein it back. And again, I'm not quite sure all the plans are in place to do that.
That's my question. Can you get to a balanced budget by 17-18, given what you know is going to be in this budget, which will be reintroduced on the 14th, I think, of July? So you think they can do it?
Unambiguously, you can do it. And we've had the lesson. Every single government proved the lesson in the 1990s. Every government in Canada can restrain expenditures in extreme fashion between 2 and, in the case of Saskatchewan, 7 years, somewhere in that period. And then if they don't do it, quote unquote, properly, it blows up in their face. The first part's not that hard. You just starve everything. And particularly like healthcare, just say, that's it. You're getting a 2% increase. Education is going to be flat. My whole thing about the commission, I didn't think it was all about numbers. It was about, can you run the programs efficiently so you can keep the cost increases down but deliver a quality of service?
You guys all know Paul Wells, who's a very fine writer for Maclean's, and he wrote an analysis of the PC party loss on Election Day, which touched on a lot of issues. And we're going to read a little excerpt of that right now, which we're entitling Bill Davis's Ontario. Here we go. Rule 1 in Bill Davis's Ontario is, you should appreciate this, he's from Brampton, right, Pam? Don't get on people's nerves. But there are a lot of Conservatives in Ontario who have forgotten the province was ever Bill Davis's. There are a lot of people who accreted around Mike Harris in 1990, John, you might be one of them, like barnacles. They've never really grown up. They were at Trinity College or Upper Canada College or Hillfield Strathallan or some other dreary Anglo-Saxon dumping ground in the early 80s when Ronald Reagan came on TV and fired the air traffic controllers, and they've spent the rest of their lives looking for an excuse to play Ayn Rand Home Edition. It even worked in 1995 when Mike Harris came back from his 1990 drubbing and years of the worst recession, combined with the worst government Ontario had seen in ages. Harris's common sense revolution worked because by 1995, thanks to Bob Rae, common sense seemed revolutionary. Here's the question, gang. Do you folks around this table understand that it still is Bill Davis's Ontario? Look at John, you're getting disgusted already, but hang on. Here's the question. And you can't run on a harsh, right-wing, union-hating, firing 100,000 people and seeming to relish it kind of platform. You get that?
That nobody, intended to run on that. I would argue no one ran on that. I would argue no one suggested we run on that. And I would absolutely say that I can give you no shortage of columnists who before and after has said that that's what was about to happen or did happen. But it's not true.
So, all right, let me get a reaction, then I'll come back and all of you.
One of the quick thing is that one of the pamphlets that I got at my doorstep from one of the unions that I won't mention on air said this was their catch line. Tim Hudak, cuts first. Okay, I couldn't argue with that. Second part, kids last. As a parent, I couldn't be more offended by that. I called the party and said, tell me we're going to sue these people after the campaign. Because there's a line, and whatever the line is, these people have gone way, way past it.
Yeah.
With the state of Ontario the way it is now, fundamentally people do relate to that Mike Harris approach. However, it's that policy-wise, but Bill Davis approach is what people are looking for, because there has to be a balance.
What does that mean?
That means take the human side of things and look at it from the eyes of the average person, and how much Ontario has changed since the Bill Davis to Mike Harris to where we are today. You have to look at the communities and demographically and what we're facing today in the cities.
Rod, just before I ask you, let me take 30 seconds too, because we have a lot of new Canadians who watch this program who will not know that Bill Davis was the longest-serving Premier of Ontario in the 20th century. He governed for 14 years. He was the, I guess, what was it, Drew, Frost, like fifth, I guess, Premier in the Tory dynasty that governed the province for 42 years, and seemed to have an intuitive understanding of where the middle of the province was, which was where most of the voters were, and could tack left when need be and tack right when need. You're arguing with me already, John, but the fact is he won 4 straight elections. So the premise is you can't be way out on the right and expect to win. You've tried that since 1987, and it's worked twice. Does the party have to reevaluate what it means to be a Conservative in Ontario in the 21st century?
I don't think that being a big C or small C Tory are mutually exclusive to one another. So I kind of agree with Bill Davis in a certain extent, but I think we need to look to the future here. So, what we've got to go back to our roots. The answer is right under our nose. We've always been the party of family and community. That's what our whole foundation of our party has been built on. The Liberals do something very well that we don't do very well. It's actually speak to people's hearts. We try to speak to people's minds all the time, to Maddie's point, where we're trying to have logical, complex ideas pass on to the electorate in a broad sense. It doesn't work. We're not wrong. Our approach isn't wrong. The communication part of it is wrong. We're not appealing to people's hearts.
The big question facing the next provincial government is how to influence the education choices of future graduates to make sure they will have the right skills for the ever-changing labor market. And to that end, let's welcome in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Ken Coates. He's a Canada Research Chair in Regional Innovation at the Johnson Choyama Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Saskatchewan. He's also the co-author of a new book called What to Consider If You Are Considering University. And Ken, we're glad to have you on the line from Western Canada. I want to start with this first question. What do you think about the Ontario government's plans to expand Ontario's university system by 60,000 spaces so that students can allegedly study closer to home?
I'm actually very worried about that. I think 60,000 students is a huge amount. It's basically 3 times the size of the University of Waterloo, where I worked for 6 years. It is a major expansion at a time when our university graduates are facing extreme difficulties finding work. The transition for university graduates to the workforce has been difficult, excellent for some, traumatic for others. I think it is a very sort of rapid expansion without a lot of thought. And in fact, it's very expensive, not tied to the workplace needs, not tied to the future aspirations of young Canadians, young Ontarians. My concern is the idea of the inflation at the bottom end. If we add 60,000 students to the Ontario University system, you first have to convince people there are 60,000 students, qualified, energetic, motivated, curious, and we're eager to learn, who actually could not currently get into the Ontario universities, or colleges, or polytechs. I'm not convinced of that at all.
Why do you doubt that's the case?
Well, several reasons. First off, we have a fairly substantial dropout rate among first and second year university students. It depends on the program and the university, but across the country, it's between 25 and 30%. I'll also tell you that when you talk to university professors about the experience, particularly with first and second year, and particularly at more open access universities, then in fact the students are ill prepared. We're accepting students into universities with marks in the low 70s, some institutions with marks in the 60s. We know when those students show up on our doorstep that they have extremely high likelihood of failure, and we don't tell them that. If we want to tell somebody, if you got a 68% average in high school and you insist on going to university and you know you have a really good chance of failing, then I think it's actually quite, fair enough if you know your chance and the consequences. But in fact, universities say, oh, please come along, we're going to give you a chance to learn and educate. We don't tell them the challenge that is there. And I'll tell you, across Canada, not just in Ontario, the undergraduate experience is getting worse and worse. You have larger classes taught by largely sessional faculty members. You have professors being frustrated with the fact that the students aren't curious or motivated or want to read. We have a wonderful group, a band of, 25, 30% at the top, who are as good a university student as we've ever had, any time in Canada's history. But we keep letting in more and more students without making sure they're ready and able to compete, ready and able to perform at the level that a university demands. And so we're doing one of two things. We're bringing them in and having them fail out. The second thing is we're letting them stay there for 4 or 5 or 6 years, and they finally graduate without the kind of skills and without the ambition and without the drive that we expect a university graduate to have.
To help us understand the nature of what it means and what it feels like being a non-tenured faculty, we welcome Moira MacDonald. She's a freelance writer and sometimes sessional faculty. Marie Vanderkloot, educational consultant and sometimes sessional faculty. And Bob Hunka, contract faculty in the Departments of Communication Studies and Humanities at York University. And it's good to have you three around the table. I want to welcome you, and in doing so, read a little something of what Ken Coates just said in the interview prior to us. Here he is from the University of Saskatchewan, in which he said, the use of adjuncts, meaning all of you, is dictated by our business model. The only way universities in Ontario can afford to pay high professor salaries and to create the research opportunities is to flood the first and second year classes with sessional instructors. The reality is that you have real trouble managing the university if half of your teachers are not part of the collegial process. They're not there to advise the students. They're not there over 4 years to help the students go through. Okay, let's get Moira to you first here. Ken Coates says half the profs, half of them, are non-tenured sessional instructors. Is it really that high in your experience?
There isn't really data on how many sessional instructors there are, what proportion of classes they're teaching.
So we don't know.
We don't know for sure, but the estimates that I've come across will point to about 20 to 30% of your faculty are sessionals, but they're teaching far more courses than that. The proportion may be anywhere between 50%. I've heard as high as 90% in some cases.
Why are they teaching a disproportionate part of the classing?
Because there's a demand there for the teaching and they're cheap. We're putting more students into university. There's definitely a push on to have students going through post-secondary. So we've got demand for classes and we've got an issue with costs at the administrative level. So sessionals are very convenient that way. And we have a reduction of tenure track positions at the faculty level.
Marie, how does it work for you when you are a sessional lecturer?
I think it works quite differently for me now than it did a few years ago. So now I have a permanent role at McMaster where I can rely on stable income and I don't have to continuously, apply for my job over and over and over again the way many sessional instructors have to. But a few years ago when I was primarily sessionally teaching for my income, it was, a deeply frustrating and anxiety-inducing experience.
Why? What particular?
There's no stability. There's no sense of when it might end, for example, or if it will end.
So they don't hire you for a whole year?
No, well, most sessionals get hired like per course, right? So you're hired for a semester, and sometimes all of the hiring may happen, in the summer period for the full year, but there's also postings that come up at all given times, right? If people drop courses or if they add, something in the next semester. So there's very little stability or sense of being able to, organize one's own time.
When you're actually in the thick of it,
Yeah.
And you see those professors with tenure,
Right.
who are, as Moira suggests, perhaps teaching a disproportionately smaller amount than you are.
Right.
Do you feel a bit like a second-class citizen in that milieu?
I would say I think that characterizes a lot of sessional work. I had some good experiences as a sessional where I taught in departments where they made an exceptional effort to try and include sessionals, which I think is atypical, and I would certainly characterize it that way, where those would be departments where they would invite sessionals to come to departmental meetings, where I was given an office, where I had some of those things that are not always available. So in those circumstances, I think people were trying to bridge the gap that exists between full-time and part-time instructors. But I think that that's an exceptional experience that I have had. And some of my other courses were not so rosy.
Not so rosy. What's your experience doing this?
Well, very similar to echo Marie. It's the experience of being a contingent faculty member is the experience of precariousness, and with that comes a whole bundle of feelings from frustration to, I would say, fear. Fear that you may lose your work because the time horizons for all these various contracts, per course contracts, fixed term contracts of various kinds, are usually no more than a year. Sometimes you're lucky if you get to have a 2 or 3 year contract, which is what I'm on now.
If the fear is there, does that mean that if you see something that concerns you, you're more than likely going to shut up about it?
I'm glad you raised this because I think one of the threats that precariousness poses is to academic freedom. And so I see this as part and parcel of this this threat that precariousness poses for faculty who are not on tenure track positions, and it has a chilling effect.
For more than 3 centuries, Scotland has been part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain. But in September of this year, there is a vote that could change that. Scots will be asked a simple question: should Scotland be an independent country? Joining us now for more on the campaigns for and against Scotland's independence and lessons learned from our own experience in Quebec, Charlie Jeffrey. He is Professor of Politics at the University of Edinburgh, and Nicola McEwen, also a Professor of Politics at the University of Edinburgh. And we're happy to have you two folks on this side of the pond. Thanks for visiting us.
Great to be here.
Okay, Nicola, why is this happening now?
It's a very good question. I'll tell you why it's not happening, okay? Because there was no evidence of any groundswell of opinion in favour of this. There's no grievance that people are rallying around. We're having a referendum now because the SNP, the pro-independence party, won an election. So that created a political opportunity for it to push ahead with its mandate to hold a referendum on independence. And that's why we're having it, purely that opportunity, not because of any massive mobilisation of support in favour of it. That doesn't mean it won't win. It could still win because it has kick-started this whole debate about Scotland's place within the UK, within the Union, and there's an awful lot of conversations going on out there.
So, Charlie, you agree the Scottish National Party won this election and therefore it's opened a window and here we are?
That's exactly right, but there is some fertile ground for it to build on, even though there is no popular mobilisation, as Nicola said, because Scots, in their clear majority, are generally dissatisfied with the government they get from the UK level in London, and Scots clearly want more self-government. The question is how much more self-government? Should that be more powers for the Scottish Parliament within the UK, or should it be the whole hog of national independence?
Nicola, do you know what an independent Scotland would look like?
Well, that would depend on the negotiated settlement. For the Scottish National Party and government in Scotland just now, what it proposes is something very similar to what the Quebec government proposed in the 1990s. It's independence with partnership. So it envisages a lot of continuities, a lot of things shared, like a shared currency, for example, or lots of shared institutions, lots of cooperation on public policies. But that partnership needs a willing partner, so it would very much depend on the response of the UK government and whether it was willing to cooperate and engage.
If it's independence plus partnership, how independent is that really?
That's the question that the UK government is asking the Scottish government. The UK government is trying to create the impression that this is not real independence, and if it's not real independence, it's not worth having. It's quite an interesting reflection of the UK government's wider views as well. It suggests that a Scottish government, an independent Scotland sharing a currency with the rest of the UK is a rather odd thing to do, in the same way that it thinks sharing a currency with the rest of the European Union is a rather odd thing to do. So there's a very different understanding of independence from the UK government side compared to that which the Scottish government is putting forward. And it may well be, if we vote yes, that willingness to partner in what the Scottish government would like to do won't be there.
So that's what a yes looks like. How about a no? Does a no mean status quo?
No, there is no such thing as the status quo, because there are already new powers coming regardless of what happens in the referendum in September. A law was passed a couple of years ago. It will come into force in 2 years' time. And even before that law is implemented to give a little bit more extra financial power, all three of the main political parties who are campaigning for a no vote have already promised more powers. They have felt the need to promise more, even before the new powers are introduced, and we see how they go. And that's clearly they feel that they have been backed into a position where they have to offer more in order to secure a no victory.
So as a bargaining tactic, it's already worked, right? The referendum has already worked in that respect. Fair to say?
I think it is pulling the pro-union parties, Labour, Conservative and Liberal Democrat, into a middle ground. And it's really important to remember that opinion in Scotland is not divided yes, no, independent status quo. It's really divided three ways. There's about a third of Scots who really would like independence whatever happened, about a third of Scots for whom the status quo is far enough, thank you very much, and a third in the middle who appear to want more but not yet leave the UK. And these offers of more devolution from the pro-union parties are an attempt to build support in that middle ground, or to shore up their support in that middle ground.
It's funny, the echoes of Quebec are so familiar here. It's amazing, that same one-third, one-third,
yes.
one-third. So
yes.
Do I assume then that the campaign is all aimed, Nicola, at that one-third in the middle who are persuadable one way or another?
Yes, in part. And it's not at all clear to me that the tactic of the no campaigning parties is really appealing to that group, because the offer that they have presented is around income tax devolution, essentially. to varying degrees. And it's quite technical. It's not really capturing the imagination. And we don't really know what that middle third wants, ultimately. They want more. There seems to be a clear distinction between people favouring the Scottish Parliament having control over domestic policies, so including taxation, but including social welfare too. And that isn't in any of the packages on offer to any significant degree. What they don't really want the Scottish Parliament to control is things like defence and foreign affairs, those big issues of state. But it's not altogether clear that what is on offer will be enough to persuade them, certainly not in full anyway.
Now, if you're looking for clues as to how this was going to turn out, last time there was an election, 2011, the Scottish National Party got about 45% of the vote. So do they bank that right away and say, okay, we've got 45, all we got to do is pick up another 5 plus and we win?
That's not the way to look at Scottish politics. The Scottish National Party was very successful in the last Scottish election, not because of its desire to create an independent Scotland. It was successful in particular because it offered more credible government than especially the Labour Party in opposition. People in Scotland think that the SNP, and in particular its current leadership, which is generally very strong, offers the best way of managing these relationships that Scotland has within the UK and getting the best deal for Scotland. This wasn't an election about independence, it was an election about how best to govern Scotland under current circumstances.
Years after the beginning of the Arab Spring, the dynamics of power have shifted in the Middle East. Joining us now to detail who has the power and who doesn't, Janice Stein, director of the Munk School of Global Affairs and TVO's Foreign Affairs analyst. Besma Momani, senior fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation, CIGI. Kamran Bukhari, VP of Middle Eastern and South Asian Affairs at Stratfor, the global intelligence firm, and he's the author of, most recently, Political Islam in the Age of Democratization. And we welcome back Thabit Abdullah, history professor at York University, and it's good to see you 4 experts around our table tonight. Let's, Janice, if we define power as the ability to shape events, let's examine who has it right now in the Middle East, and we're going to start with Egypt. The verdict in the case of the journalists, one of whom is Canadian. What does that tell us about who has power in Egypt today?
That's actually a difficult question to answer. The obvious answer would be is that it's the President General Assisi and that the judiciary are simply falling in line behind him. But I actually don't think that's accurate.
Okay.
The judiciary in Egypt always has had a history of independence. I think continues to have some independence from the president. When President Morsi was in power, one of his principal targets was the judiciary. And so independently, on their own, many existing judges who were appointed in the Mubarak era are furious with the brothers and the attacks against the judiciary during that period. It's conceivable that they continue to exercise power on their own without receiving detailed instructions on how to render a verdict from the president.
Kamran, what does it say as far as you can tell?
I'll take what Janice just said and take it a step further.
Sure.
The judiciary has its own power, but it also shares power with Sisi, with the military, with the civilian bureaucracy, and the internal security forces. So these are various centers of power. Sometimes what happens is that a particular ruling by a court or a judge is, it is in the interest of everyone, or the players, if you will. And so it appears that, this was a nod from the top. But it's not. There is a great deal of autonomy, and there's a great deal, and at a time when the old order is in meltdown mode and the new order has not emerged, everyone is sort of jockeying. All these power centers are jockeying, trying to A, safeguard their position, B, enhance their power to the extent that they can.
So this judge didn't necessarily get a signal from on high. He just made a bad decision on his own.
I think that is the case.
That is the case. Besma, how about you? What does it indicate to you in terms of who's got the power in Egypt today?
Well, just following on that, I don't think the judiciary is particularly very good. And let's not confuse judicial independence or autonomy with excellence in the professional standards of conduct that we would find in other places. The Egyptian judiciary is just a joke. And I think anybody who's had to experience the Egyptian judiciary from within can tell you how much of a mess it is, overly bureaucratized, and the quality is quite poor. But that said, there is this, this sort of national pride that somehow their judiciary is more independent relative to other institutions. That said, I think that, clearly if Sisi wanted to do something, he could have. If he wanted to intervene, he could have. This is not a country that is really independent in the Western liberal sense. That said, there is a reason why I think Sisi continued to allow the judges to basically go on with their verdict. And that's because he can, have host Kerry on the Sunday, and on the Monday, thumb the Americans and say, look, we are an independent nation, and here we are allowing our judiciary to perform in their utmost professional standard, which I think is really just a joke. It's all optics for domestic consumption, and that's swallowed very, generously at home in Egypt. But the truth is, I think, if we want to really, if Sisi really wanted to do something, he could have intervened, but clearly it's not in his interest or in his benefit to intervene.
Let me pick up on that notion of domestic consumption with you then, Thabit. We've often heard of this expression of the power of the street, or sometimes the power of the Arab street. Do you believe in that there is power in that street to shape events in the Middle East?
Yes, I mean, what I wanted to contribute to this is that there's another source of power that is not recognized as official, that has come to the fore now after the Arab Spring. Now, everybody has been criticizing the Arab Spring, that's been a failure, etc. I think, I agree with Kamran that the old order was given a mortal blow in the Arab Spring. The new order hasn't yet emerged. But in the meantime, there's been a vacuum and a fragmentation of power which has allowed more than ever, I think, all over the Arab world specifically, for non-governmental organizations and groups and communities and so forth to actually wield quite a bit of influential power. I saw that in Egypt when I was living in Egypt, and now even more so. In Iraq, despite all the mess, you see an incredible ability of various non-governmental groupings, be they traditional, such as tribes, for example, or sort of modernistic, such as NGOs and so forth, to actually have an enormous influence. And this might be something good that might come out of this really very turbulent and dangerous period.
I agree with the general principle, but I just don't think it operates in this particular case. I mean, this was a fairly straightforward one. Al Jazeera is in very bad repute in Egypt among those who opposed the brothers. Among those who supported the brothers, that's an entirely different story. So Al Jazeera is now a polarizing force inside Egypt. The judiciary lined up on one side of this argument, and that's why I say it's not as simple as saying they're al-Sisi's mouthpiece. But I think Mesma, a little too harsh on the Egyptian judiciary. In 2005, it was the judges' strike against Mubarak that actually was the first harbinger of the Egyptian Spring. Judges, a judges' union went out into the streets on strike to protest against what they refused to sign off on what they regarded as a corrupt election. So there is a history in Egypt of an independent role for the judiciary. This was a really awful decision. That I don't think there's any argument about. But they're not simply a mouthpiece.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety. They're all on our website, theagenda.tvo.org, on our iTunes channel, and on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/theagenda.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.